Have you ever thought you knew someone, only to discover their life was a story you'd never been told? Imagine returning to a place you tried to forget, a house silent with memories, only to unearth a secret that redefines everything you believed. This is a story about two siblings who thought their parents were a source of shame. They were wrong. What they found, locked away in a hidden room, was a legacy of unimaginable courage, a love that survived war and fire, and a truth that would either shatter them or finally bring them home. The story centres on Abigail and Caleb, two siblings in their late 30s who have built successful lives in the city, far from their Appalachian roots. They've always been burdened by a quiet shame surrounding their parents. Their father, Jim, a Vietnam veteran who spent his life in a wheelchair, and their mother, Elara, a reclusive woman who always hid her face behind a veil of scarves and shadows. After Elara's recent death, they returned to the decaying family home in the hollows of West Virginia, not to mourn, but to liquidate the assets and close a painful chapter of their lives. Their relationship is strained, built on a shared history of wanting to escape the very legacy they must now confront. The old Ford pickup rattled down the gravel road, kicking up a plume of reddish dust that clung to the humid summer air. Abigail gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Beside her, Caleb stared out at the blur of dense green forest, his jaw tight. The house appeared around the final bend, smaller and more derelict than in their memories. Its white paint was peeling, revealing the weathered grey wood beneath like old bones. A profound silence hung over the property, broken only by the chirping of cicadas. "Well, this is it," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Let's just get this over with." There was no sadness in his tone, only a grim determination. For them, this house wasn't a home filled with cherished memories. It was a monument to a past they had spent 2 decades trying to outrun. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of dust, dried herbs, and a faint, lingering sorrow. Sunlight struggled through grimy window panes, illuminating dancing dust motes in long, cinematic shafts. They moved through the small house like ghosts, their footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. Every object was a relic of a life they barely understood. In the living room, Jim's wheelchair sat by the cold fireplace, its worn leather seat cracked with age. On the mantel, a single faded photograph showed a young, handsome soldier with a confident grin, standing next to a beautiful girl with eyes the colour of summer violets. It was the only picture they owned of their mother's undamaged face. Abigail picked it up, her thumb tracing the outline of her mother's smile. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. A school play, her mother in the back row, her face hidden by a dark scarf. The other kids had pointed and whispered. Shame, hot and familiar, washed over her even now. "Don't dwell on it," Caleb warned, seeing the look on her face. "Remember the plan. We sort, we pack, we call the realtor, clean break." He was already opening the closet, his movements brisk and businesslike, a defence against the suffocating weight of the past. In their mother's bedroom, a small cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed. Caleb pried it open with the screwdriver. It wasn't filled with jewellery or keepsakes, but with bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. They were addressed in a strong, masculine hand to my Ellie Mae at an address that hadn't existed for 50 years. "His letters," Abigail whispered, picking one up. The paper was brittle, the ink faded to a rusty brown. She carefully unfolded it. The date was 1969. The words painted a vivid picture of a world far from these quiet mountains, the oppressive heat of the jungle, the deafening roar of helicopters, the constant fear. But mostly, the soldier wrote of her. He wrote of her violet eyes, the sound of her laughter, and the taste of the wild berry jam she'd made. He wrote of home, a place that felt 1,000,000 miles away. It was a side of their stoic, silent father they had never known, a passionate young man in love, clinging to a memory to survive hell. The letter in Abigail's hand trembled, the past bleeding into the dusty present. The scene shifted, the air growing thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. A much younger Ellie Mae, barely 17, ran through the deep woods, her hair a wild mane. The sound wasn't cicadas, but the distant rhythmic thumping of a helicopter in distress, followed by a sickening crash, and then silence. Fear warred with a fierce, mountain-bred curiosity. She found him in a clearing, half-conscious and tangled in the wreckage of a downed Bell Huey. He was just a boy, his uniform torn and stained, a deep gash on his leg bleeding profusely. His dog tags glinted in the dappled sunlight. Sullivan James. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain. "Am I dead?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "No," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're in the Black Fork Hollow, and you're safe now." It was a promise she didn't know if she could keep. Back in the present, Caleb had found a shoebox filled with his mother's things. Not letters, but pressed flowers, scraps of poetry, and dozens of dried herbal bundles, each meticulously labelled in her spidery handwriting. Yarrow for fever, golden seal for infection, willow bark for pain. He remembered the smell of these herbs simmering on the stove, a scent that had permeated his entire childhood. The other townsfolk called her a healer. Some whispered she was a witch. For Caleb, it was just another thing that made his family different, another reason to be ashamed. He saw her in his mind's eye, a phantom of the past, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, her face obscured by shadow and a fall of dark hair. She had always been a mystery, a creature of folklore, not a mother he could ever truly know or understand. He tossed the bundles back into the box, the dry leaves rustling like whispers. The memory deepened, pulling him back. The small, original cabin was hazy with the steam from a boiling pot. Ellie Mae's grandmother Maeve, a woman with eyes as old as the mountains, inspected the soldier's leg with a practiced hand. Her movements were swift and sure. "Infections set in," she grunted, her voice like stones grinding together. "City medicine won't do him good here. We use what the mountain gives us." For days they worked in tandem. Maeve taught Ellie Mae how to make a poultice from jewelweed, how to brew a tea from willow bark that would bring the fever down. They bathed his wounds, forced broth between his lips, and sat with him through the long, delirious nights. In those fevered dreams, Jim Sullivan spoke of fire and rain, of friends lost, and of a girl with violet eyes he prayed he'd see again. Ellie Mae listened, her heart aching for this broken stranger, a boy sent to fight a war in a world she couldn't imagine. In the present day, sunlight streamed into the room, catching the dust, stirred up by their movements. The air was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "The Schiffer robe," Caleb finally said, gesturing to the massive, dark wood wardrobe against the far wall. "That's got to go. It's probably the only thing in here worth anything." It was a colossal piece of furniture, ornately carved and imposing. It had stood in that same spot for as long as they could remember. A silent, dark sentinel. They both pushed against it, their shoes slipping on the dusty floorboards. It wouldn't budge. "It feels like it's bolted to the floor," Abigail grunted, wiping sweat from her brow. Caleb got on his hands and knees, peering behind it. He ran his hand along the wall. "That's weird," he said, his voice muffled. "The baseboard stops. And there's a seam." He pushed harder, and with a low groan of protesting wood, the giant wardrobe shifted a few inches, revealing the unmistakable outline of a door. A hidden door. It seemed impossible, something out of a Gothic novel, not their boring rural childhood home. There was no knob, only a small, inset iron ring tarnished with age. They looked at each other, a flicker of something other than resentment passing between them for the first time that day. It was a shared sense of wonder and trepidation. With a concerted effort, they pulled the door open. It swung inward with a deep, shuddering creak, releasing a wave of cool, musty air that smelled of earth, cedar, and time itself. The space beyond was pitch black. Caleb fumbled for his phone, switching on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a steep, narrow set of wooden stairs leading down into what looked like a cellar. "What is this place?" Abigail whispered, her voice filled with an awe that bordered on fear. The secrets of the house, it seemed, ran deeper than they could have ever imagined. They descended the rickety stairs, the flashlight beam dancing across damp stone walls. The cellar was small and cramped, but it wasn't for storage. This was a room with a purpose. Along one wall, rough-hewn shelves were lined with dozens of sealed glass jars, but it wasn't preserves or canned vegetables. They were filled with salves, tinctures, and neatly rolled bandages. A small cot was folded in a corner. Hanging from wooden pegs were several faded, olive-drab army field jackets, some patched, one with a dark, stiff stain on the sleeve. This wasn't a root cellar. It was a makeshift infirmary, a secret sanctuary hidden from the world, a place of healing, a place where their mother and grandmother had clearly hidden more than just a wounded soldier named Jim Sullivan. They realized with a dawning chill that their father wasn't an anomaly. He was just the one who had stayed. As their eyes adjusted, they saw more. A stack of dog-eared paperback books, a tarnished Zippo lighter engraved with the name Johnny, a harmonica resting on a small crate. These were the traces of other men, other boys from the surrounding hollows who had come home from the war broken in body or spirit, men who couldn't face the judgment of a town that didn't understand, or who couldn't sleep for the nightmares. Ellie Mae and her grandmother had created a haven for them, a place to mend in the quiet dark, shielded by the mountains and a chifforobe. Abigail thought of her mother, always so quiet and withdrawn. She had mistaken her reclusiveness for weakness, for fear. Now, she saw it in a new light. It was the vigilance of a protector, the quiet strength of a woman who carried the secrets and sorrows of a generation of soldiers. A small wooden box sat on the crate next to the harmonica. Abigail lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a piece of warm velvet, was her father's purple heart. Next to it was another medal, one she didn't recognize, a bronze star for valor. But beneath them was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was an unofficial commendation, a letter written on military stationery, signed by a captain in the 101st Airborne. It was addressed to Ellie Mae. It spoke of how Jim Sullivan's letters from her, the ones he read aloud in the barracks, had become a lifeline for his entire platoon. Her descriptions of the mountains, of the changing seasons, of a life of peace, had given them all something to fight for, something to come home to. The captain thanked her for her service, calling her a beacon in the darkness. She had fought the war in her own way, with words and love from thousands of miles away. The flashlight beam fell upon something that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. It was a newspaper clipping, old and brittle, from a local paper dated 1970. The headline read, "Local Healer and Granddaughter Perish in Cabin Fire." The article described a tragic fire that had consumed a remote cabin belonging to Maeve Collins, known for her folk remedies. The bodies were never recovered from the ashes. It was a lie, a carefully constructed lie. The fire had happened, but they had survived. They had let the world believe they were dead so they could continue their work in secret, so they could protect the soldiers who came to them without drawing the attention of the law or the government. They had erased themselves from the world to save others. The quiet, strange woman who was their mother had orchestrated all of it. Her secrecy was a shield, not just for her scars, but for the lives of the men she had sworn to protect. The scene flashes back again, this time to smoke and fire. The night is filled with screams and the roar of consuming flames. A kerosene lamp has overturned. Young Ellie Mae drags her grandmother from the burning cabin, the heat searing, the smoke choking. A falling beam catches her, a tongue of fire lashing across the side of her face. The pain is blinding, absolute. Later, by the creek, she sees her reflection in the dark water. The girl with the violet eyes is gone, replaced by a stranger with a ruined face. Her grandmother, her breath shallow, clutches Ellie Mae's hand. "The gift is yours now," Maeve rasps, her voice a dry whisper. "Don't let the fire take it. Hide, heal, remember the boys." Those were her last words. In that moment, Ellie Mae Collins died, and a ghost was born, a secret keeper for the broken boys of the Vietnam War. Driven by this new, shattering understanding, they searched the rest of the house with a different kind of urgency. In the back of a kitchen pantry, behind sacks of flour and sugar, they found more, not for soldiers, but for them. Dozens of jars of blackberry jam, spiced apple butter and pickled green beans. Each lid had a label written in their mother's shaky, aging hand. For Abby, her favourite. For Caleb, with love. A date was written on each one, a continuous timeline of a mother's love, offered in silence, year after year. She had kept making their childhood favourites, long after they had stopped coming home, long after they had made it clear they wanted nothing from her. Each jar was a prayer, a hope that one day they might return. The sight of it was a physical blow. Abigail leaned against the wall, a sob escaping her lips, the first true tears she had shed for her mother. Caleb stood frozen, staring at the jars. He remembered a time he was 10 years old and had a terrible flu. His mother had sat by his bed for 3 days, bathing his forehead with cool cloths and feeding him sips of a bitter herbal tea. She never spoke, but her presence was a constant soothing comfort. He remembered the feel of her cool, smooth hand on his, the one part of her that wasn't scarred. As a teenager, he had resented her silence, her strangeness. He saw it as a rejection. Now he understood. It was a language of its own. Her love wasn't in words or hugs. It was in the quiet vigil, the simmering pot of herbs, the jars of jam prepared for children who never came. It was a love that was steady, patient and absolute, and he had been completely blind to it. The weight of that lost time, of that profound misunderstanding, crashed down on him. They found her journal tucked under a loose floorboard in her bedroom. The entries were sparse, just a few lines each day. They weren't emotional outpourings, but records. Johnny T came by. Nightmares are bad again. Gave him chamomile and skullcap. Billy W's stump is infected. Dressed it with a sugar pine poultice. Jim read to me from a book of poems. His voice is weaker. It was a ledger of pain, a chronicle of healing. But then there were other entries. Planted the tomatoes. Caleb's favourite. The blackberries are ripe. I should make jam for Abby. Jim says the children will understand someday. I pray he's right. The final entry, from the week before she died, was almost illegible. The mountain is quiet now. The boys are all gone home, one way or another. I'm tired. I hope they'll be okay. It was a final, quiet prayer for the children who had abandoned her. The story of their parents reassembled itself in their minds, no longer a narrative of shame, but an epic of quiet courage. Jim Sullivan, the war hero who came home to a country that didn't want him, his body shattered. He found his salvation not in a hospital, but in a hidden cellar, tended to by a ghost, and he stayed. He chose a life of obscurity with the woman who saved him, finding his peace in the silence of the mountains. He had never spoken of his heroism, had never shown them his medals. He let them think he was just a broken man in a wheelchair. And Alara, the healer, she had sacrificed her face, her name, her very existence in the world, to create a sanctuary. She wore her scars not as a mark of tragedy, but as a testament to her love and her duty. She hid her face from the world, but she had never hidden her heart. Abigail remembered a phone call from a few years back. Her mother had called, a rare occurrence. Her voice was small, hesitant. The dogwoods are blooming, Abby. They're real pretty this year. Abigail, busy with a work deadline, had been dismissive. That's nice, Mom. Listen, I have to go. She had hung up, annoyed at the interruption. Now, the memory was a knife in her gut. It hadn't been an idle comment about the weather. It was an invitation. It was an offering of peace, of beauty. It was her mother, in her own quiet way, saying, I miss you. Come home. And she had rejected it without a second thought. How many other invitations had she missed? How many quiet offerings of love had she been too busy, too proud, too ashamed to see? The regret was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. Caleb walked back into the living room and stood before his father's empty wheelchair. He reached out and touched the worn armrest. He had always seen the chair as a symbol of his father's weakness, a constant, humiliating reminder of what his father couldn't do. He couldn't play catch. He couldn't run. He couldn't be like the other dads. But he had been wrong. The chair wasn't a symbol of weakness. It was a throne. It was the command post from which a man who had lost his legs had managed to build a life, raise a family, and love a woman with a fierce and unwavering loyalty. His father's strength wasn't in his legs. It was in his heart, a heart that had been big enough to embrace a life of silence and secrets for the woman who had anchored his soul. Caleb finally saw his father, not for what he had lost, but for all that he had been. They sat on the dusty porch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The realtor's card felt heavy and obscene in Abigail's hand. They had come here to erase a history, to sever the final ties to a past that embarrassed them. But that past was not what they thought. It was a legacy of honour, compassion, and a love so profound it had literally moved mountains and cheated death. The house was no longer just a dilapidated building on a forgotten patch of land. It was a repository of stories. It was a sanctuary. It was sacred ground, consecrated by the quiet heroism of the two people they had so profoundly misjudged. To sell it now would not just be a transaction. It would be a desecration, the ultimate betrayal of a sacrifice they were only just beginning to comprehend. Without a word, Abigail tore the realtor's card in half, then in quarters, and let the pieces flutter from her hand like confetti. Caleb watched them fall and then gave a slow, deliberate nod. The decision was made silently and unanimously. This was their home, not the sterile apartments in the city, but this old, creaking house, filled with the ghosts of heroes and the enduring love of their parents. They would not sell. They would restore. They would honour the memory of the man in the wheelchair and the woman who hid her face. They would make this place a testament to their story, a place for their own children to learn what true strength and courage looked like. It was a daunting task, a life-changing decision, but for the first time, it felt like they were finally on the right path, the path that led back home. In the months that followed, the house began to breathe again. Caleb, a skilled woodworker, replaced the rotting porch boards and repaired the leaky roof. Abigail, with her eye for design, stripped away the grime, revealing the warm, beautiful wood beneath. They didn't erase the past. They integrated it. Jim's wheelchair was cleaned and placed in a position of honour by the fireplace. The secret cellar was cleaned and preserved, the jars and jackets left as they were, a private museum of compassion. They found a local craftsman to build a beautiful display case for Jim's medals and the captain's letter, placing it on the mantel right below the photograph of the smiling soldier and the girl with violet eyes. The house was slowly transforming from a place of sorrow and secrets into a beacon of remembrance and love. One crisp autumn afternoon, Abigail was planting daffodil bulbs along the porch, her hands deep in the cool, rich earth. She looked up at the house, now painted a warm, welcoming yellow, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. She realised her mother's gift hadn't been just about herbs and healing. It was about nurturing. It was the ability to see the life hidden in the dirt, to tend to the broken, and to have faith that something beautiful could grow from the darkest of places. Her mother had tended to the wounded souls of men, and now Abigail and Caleb were tending to the wounded soul of the house, and in doing so, they were healing themselves. She pressed a bulb into the ground, a silent promise to the mother she was finally getting to know, a promise that beauty would continue to bloom here. The first time they brought their own families was the following summer. The sound of children's laughter filled the hollow, a sound that hadn't been heard there for decades. Caleb's son, a boy of 8, was fascinated by his grandfather's wheelchair, asking a million questions that Caleb now had the answers to. Abigail's daughter, who had her great-grandmother's violet eyes, spent hours in the woods, collecting interesting leaves and stones. They sat on the new porch, watching their children play in the yard, and told them the story. Not the story of their shame, but the real story of Grandpa Jim, the brave soldier, and Grandma Sally May, the secret healer, who was even braver. They were passing the legacy on, replacing the silence and secrets with truth and pride. One evening, as twilight settled over the mountains, Abigail's daughter came running inside, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mommy, I saw her," she exclaimed. "Who did you see, sweetie?" Abigail asked. "The quiet lady," the little girl whispered. "The one from the stories. She was standing by the big oak tree and she was smiling. And Mommy, she has your eyes." Abigail and Caleb exchanged a look. There was no fear, only a profound sense of comfort. Their mother was still here. Her spirit was woven into the fabric of this place, into the trees, the mountains, and the cool evening air. She was watching over them, her love a silent, protective presence. She was finally at peace, her work complete, her children finally home. The house in Black Fork Hollow became their anchor. Every holiday, every summer, they returned. It was a place of pilgrimage, a place to reconnect not only with their past, but with each other. The bond between brother and sister, once frayed by shame and distance, was now unbreakable, forged in the shared discovery of their parents' truth. They worked the land, tended the garden their mother had loved, and kept the memories alive. The locals who had once whispered about the strange woman in the Collins house now spoke of her with a hushed reverence, as the story of what she had done slowly, quietly, became the new folklore of the Hollow. The shame that had haunted Abigail and Caleb for so long had been replaced by a deep, abiding pride. Caleb found he had a knack for his grandmother's craft. He started studying the old herbal books they found, learning the properties of the plants that grew wild on their land. He wasn't a healer, not like Elara, but he found a deep satisfaction in making simple salves and teas, in understanding the language of the mountain that his mother and grandmother had known so well. It was his way of connecting with them, of honouring their gift. He even taught his son how to identify ginseng and yarrow, passing the knowledge down another generation, ensuring that the legacy of the healers of Black Fork Hollow would not be forgotten. Abigail discovered a box of her mother's journals she had missed before. These were different, more personal. In them, Elara wrote about her life with Jim. She wrote of his quiet strength, his unwavering patience, and the profound, unspoken understanding that flowed between them. They had built a world for themselves, a fortress of love against the pain of the past. "He sees me," one entry read. "He does not see the scars. He sees the girl he met in the woods, and I see him, not the chair, the soldier with the laughing eyes. We are whole together." Abigail closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Her parents' life hadn't been a tragedy. It had been the most incredible love story she had ever known. One day, while clearing out the old shed, Caleb found a small, hand-carved wooden bird. It was weathered and smooth with age. He recognized the simple, elegant style of his father's whittling. He remembered seeing his father sitting on the porch, a block of wood in his lap, a knife in his hand, his movements slow but precise. He had been making these small carvings all along. On the bottom of the bird, a single word was burned into the wood: hope. It was the perfect summary of his father's life. A man who had endured the worst of humanity, who had lost so much, but had never, ever lost hope. He had found it in the mountains, in the love of a woman, and in the quiet dignity of a life lived on his own terms. They stood on the porch, looking out at the mountains bathed in the soft light of a new morning. The house was alive, filled with the warmth of family and the echoes of a powerful past. They had come to close a door, but instead they had found one that opened up to the truth of who they were and where they came from. The shame was gone, replaced by a legacy. The silence was gone, replaced by stories. They were the children of a hero and a healer, the keepers of a secret history, and they were finally, truly home. Their parents had given them a final, profound gift, the truth, and it had, at long last, set them free. In the end, it was the heavy chifforobe that opened the door not just to a hidden room, but to a hidden history of love and sacrifice. Abigail and Caleb came to bury the past, but instead, the past resurrected them. They discovered that their parents' apparent weaknesses were, in fact, their greatest strengths. Their father's wheelchair was a throne of resilience, and their mother's scars were a map of her boundless compassion. They learned that the most important stories are often the ones told in whispers, in acts of quiet courage that the world never sees. They didn't just save a house, they reclaimed their family, their history, and themselves. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. What family secrets have you discovered that changed your perspective on everything?